Hi everyone, welcome.
Hey, Kashi.
Hey Matt, how you doing?
I'm good. You?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
So what time do you want to start? Give everyone a couple of minutes to come in.
Yeah, I think we give another like minute or so, just let people trickle in.
Yeah.
And yeah, once you know the flow sort of slows down a little bit, um, I reckon we've got a pretty interesting question to ask you all.
Ooh. Kashi, I've got a top tip for people attending webinars.
Oh,
You know when they say, "Have you got any questions?" and your mind goes blank,
yeah.
have a little bit of AI in the background and say, "What questions could I ask?"
Oh, I like that.
So we're going to have a little poll at the beginning if you've just joined, but we do encourage people to ask questions in the chat. And as you're coming in, if you could just say your name and why you're attending today, it would be lovely to see who's here. How many people signed up today, Kashi, to the webinar?
A whopping like 187 or something.
Wow, that's cool.
Think, yeah, a lot of people interested in this topic,
So
which
it'll
is really
be
cool.
so we'll be people watching it live now, and I presume there's going to be some people listening to this on catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, indeed. Right, shall I chuck that question out to everyone then?
Let's do the poll.
Yeah. Right. Here we go. Hopefully a poll's just come up on your screen. Oh, thanks for flagging that. Let me just sort that. There we go. That should be sorted now, everyone.
We'll give everyone another 30 seconds, then we'll read out the results.
Good.
Hope everyone's got their cups of teas, coffees. If you've got a drink, pop it in the chat. I'd love to know what you're drinking. It's past 1 o'clock. Could be someone having a glass of wine on their day off. But you wouldn't choose to come to a webinar by me on your day off, I suppose, would you, Kashi?
No, webinar with a glass of wine sounds pretty wicked to me.
As a non-drinker, some of the non-alcoholic wines are actually getting half decent now.
Oh, they are.
For the last few years, they've just been like so sugary you can't even drink. I've had some at weddings and stuff where you couldn't even finish a glass. It's so disgusting. But some
Finding a good alcohol-free red wine was a bit of a challenge.
yeah, the beers are pretty good now, but
Yeah.
the wines are definitely changed. The gins are
Ooh,
good.
got some great answers in the chat here.
I can't see them. Can you read a few out, Kashi?
Yeah, sure. So Emma is drinking Barocca, having had a heavy weekend after running a 7-year-old's party. Couple
That
of
for those that don't go to 7-year-old parties, that deserves like a gold Olympic medal, I think.
yeah, we have some teas, some coffees, a vegetable cuppa soup.
Vegetable cup of soup. Who's
Love
that?
that.
Who's on the vegetable cup of soup?
Who do we have on the vegetable cuppa soup? Katie Allen. Of course it'd be you, Katie.
Very healthy.
Quality, I love it.
Anyone just drinking a can of Coke or Pepsi? Anyone going to admit to that?
No, but I will.
Cool. Should we check the results then, Kashi?
Lovely. Yes, absolutely. So here be the results. We're looking at, do you currently measure both employee happiness and engagement in your organization? And so the leading answer at 59% was no, we only measure employee engagement.
Okay.
Followed by 22% of yes, we measure both. And then 11% said no, we don't measure employee engagement or happiness.
Okay.
And 8% said we only measure employee happiness.
Cool. Okay. Should we get into it?
Go for it, Matt.
Kashi, before you go, so that people know that you're not just like an AI bot, do you want to introduce yourself? Because
Oh,
you're
yeah, of
obviously
course.
a big part of the happiness index, and I would like people to know who you are as well.
No, definitely. So I'm Kashi. My name's not events team. Sorry, I've got to change that. I'm Kashi. I am the community and events exec at the Happiness Index. So I sort of run all the behind the scenes parts of our webinars and the in-person events. If any of you have been to our conferences, and yeah, that's kind of my situation. I do some of our social media stuff and run our community. And yeah, I love getting to know you all. It's all been a good time. So I hope you enjoy this webinar. Matt's got a really good one in for you.
I hope so, Kashi. I hope so. We'll wait for the
It
feedback to
will be.
decide
It will
that.
be. It will
Cool.
be.
Let's
And
check.
any questions and stuff as you go throughout, please do feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. I'll be behind the scenes just making sure that they get answered for you.
Yeah, the tougher the question, the better. And if it's in your head and you're thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure whether that's silly or whatever," please ask it. Sometimes it's the question that someone thinks is silly that opens up a really great conversation. So, welcome to the Happiness Index is the difference between employee engagement and happiness. We would have probably and should have done added and why that is important, but they wouldn't fit on the slide. So I think we will talk about the differences today, but I think it's as important to talk about why understanding the differences is important as well. So that's the title. I'm Matt. I'm one of the co-founders of the Happiness Index. I write a lot of content on our data and our research. My latest book out is called The Happiness Index: Why Today's Emotions Equals Tomorrow's Business Success. If you ever hear me talk or you ever come to any of our events, I will probably tell you that what makes me happy is if I can get being CEO and being dad in some kind of flow where it all works together, which quite often it doesn't. But that's my goal in life, to be 8 out of 10 at both. Like, my family is the most important thing to me, but I don't mind admitting that my career is also important, and I want to try and make all that work together. And the research and data of the Happiness Index, one, helps businesses, but I have to say it helps me a lot too. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, you can use your phone to scan that QR code and connect up and say hello. And that's my cat. There's no reason to have my cat in there other than she's really cute. That's Missy. So let's jump in. Once upon a time, I thought it was important, because we had a little bit of time. Often the webinars are 20 minutes, to just give you the origin story of the Happiness Index. So that Happiness Index was actually built as an internal tool. The people that you see on that beach in Cornwall, that's not in the Caribbean, that's not in the Seychelles, that is in England. That was my first company that I co-founded. We were a really fast growing marketing business all around the world, headquartered in the UK. And as we grew, it became really tough. When we were small, it was really easy to understand how people were feeling and understand how to retain people and so on. But as we grew, we lost a bit of an understanding of what made our people tick from when we were like 10, 15 people. And we decided that we needed to find a way to understand how happy our people were, because up at the top there was our, what we called our mission, which was personal, customer and agency growth. So we adapted the Richard Branson quote, which is, customers don't come first, employees come first. If you look after your employees, they will look after your customers and you will do well. And that's what our mission became. And we were a data driven organization and we had data on everything. from how many loo rolls were in the bathroom through to how much media spend we were spending for our clients. But we didn't have any data on the thing that we said was important. We were saying people are our greatest asset. So many companies say that people are the most important thing. They're our greatest asset. But we said to ourselves, we don't actually have data on what is one of the most important things. And as you've probably heard people say, you measure what you treasure. We were saying this was important, but we weren't actually measuring it. So we built the happiness index as an internal tool, and we started to roll it out to ourselves. And there's a saying in technology that if you're not embarrassed by version 1 of your product, you didn't launch early enough. And I can categorically tell you, this is version 1 of the happiness index, and I am embarrassed by version 1. At this point, going back to the subject today, we didn't even know what employee engagement was. We just knew, we read up on employee engagement and we thought, I'm not sure employees would talk about employee engagement down the pub. So let's measure something that and use the language of the employee rather than the language of our HR operation. So we built the happiness index. We got it out there. It was version 1 was terrible, but it did what we wanted. We started to look at the correlation between, as we called it, staff happiness and client happiness at that point. And a crazy, strange thing happened that once we built version 1 and we used it on our customers, people kept asking for it. And then more people asked for it and more people asked for it. So we thought, you know what, there is something happening here. And we sold our marketing agency, and rather than retiring, which we should have done, we decided to plow all of our money into the happiness index, which at certain points I have regretted, as we've had big challenges in the happiness index, like lots of companies did through COVID and so on. But I'm happy to say it has been a good decision in the long run, but scary at times. But I just wanted people to know that the happiness index it's not like we just woke up in the middle of the night and had an idea. It was built because of an actual business need that we needed for ourselves. And it expanded because more companies were trying to get under the hood of what's going on in their organization. So it's just a bit about the origins. This is the first week 2 when we first started trying to introduce the happiness index at webinars and events and so on. These are the sort of feedback that we were getting. I'll show you out the one on the left. I wouldn't buy it, Matt. If my employees are unhappy, I sack them. This one in the middle, I had a meeting when a prospect walked into the room and said, "Oh, so you're the happiness guy. Just so you know, I don't believe in happiness at work." And at that point, he left the room. In total, the meeting lasted 30 seconds. That was feedback my co-founder Tony got. I blame Tony for that comment, because I believe that's a really badly qualified meeting. I think, does someone appreciate happiness is probably a good qualifier, and I hope the fact that you're all here today says that too. The one on the right sounds a bit like from a Disney movie. I love the demo and the real-time data, but there is just one problem. I don't believe in happiness. That was a company that you will have all heard of, which I won't reveal today. But that was said to my other co-founder, Chris. So I just wanted to let you know that the world has changed. And these are problems that we faced a lot 10 years ago. But some of you will be working in organizations where you come up against these challenges. And I know it still happens today, because sometimes people in HR teams come to us and say, "Look, I've had one of your demos with the sales team. I love it, but my CEO just doesn't believe in it." So today is really about trying to unpick some of that through this title, to help you if you are interested in the subject, but you're trying to get people to understand this not necessarily a fluffy subject. So that's just a bit of context. Where we are now, we've measured over 4 million employees and what makes them tick in over 100 countries, which is about 40 million data points. So everything I talked to you about today is coming from what we're learning, and we're learning constantly all the time. There is no sales pitch today, but if you do want a demo of the happiness index, just grab your phone out and you'll be able to get a direct link through to booking a demo with the sales team. So I won't talk about the platform again today, but that's it on the left there. The team would probably describe it as emotional intelligence at scale. Below 100 employees, you probably know most people's names. You know a lot about what makes them tick. But once an organization gets over that 100 employees, it's a lot harder to understand how your people think and how they feel. So book a demo if you're interested. So I just want to give a bit of a context. For those that have read my latest book will understand how much I encourage people to read George Orwell and reread 1984, or read it if you haven't. I think companies and organizations are at a crossroads that I call the crossroads of change. And I think the technology that we have available to us as leaders is going to either allow us to free our employees and get the most out of them, or control them. And even in the press this week, there has been companies saying that they want their employees, that they will enforce the return to office by tracking IP data on phones. So I think we're at a huge crossroads here. And I think the type of stuff that we're going to go on and talk to about in this session can really free us. It can help us understand what really makes people tick, rather than what we just believe, because that's what we were taught by our manager before, but it's not necessarily based on any data or research. And I think there's a lot of companies that are just being run because that's the way it's always been run. So hopefully today might just fire off a few things that you find helpful and you might be able to use in your organization. And if you do use any of this stuff today, please let me know. So that's just a bit of context around where I feel we are. In terms of freeing us, understanding ourselves is part of that process, because the more that we understand ourselves, the less likely we are to be able to control, the more likely it is for us to get the best out of ourselves. So when you look at most employee engagement surveys, they're based on the assumption that human beings are rational and they ask very rational questions. And people like rational questions because you can put them in boxes and you can say they're objective. However, most neuroscientists, psychologists would argue that we are not wholly rational beings. Some people always go as far as to say we're not rational at all. We would say at the happiness index, if we use our research, that how we think and feel at work is made up from all different parts of our brain and body. And we feel by only looking at the rational part, because that's safer and that's easier to measure, that you're only looking at 1/4 of really what's going on in an organization. When we measure at the happiness index, we're looking at instinctive needs, emotional needs. We don't ignore rational. We still measure employee engagement. And we also look at what's going on in the prefrontal cortex. So we would talk about that from a data perspective as reflective, what we reflectively feel about a situation. So when I talk to you today, I'll be talking about 4 levels of data, rather than what we would say most employee engagement surveys give you 1 level of data, whereas we're going into 4 layers or 4 dimensions, whatever way is easy for you to visualize it. There is a downside to that. The downside is you if you were going to do a happiness index survey, you're probably going to go deeper, and you're going to probably find stuff that may make some people in your organization feel uncomfortable. My counter argument to that is, if you're finding out information about things that are uncomfortable, it's happening, it's there. All you're doing as a leadership team is being aware of it. And if there are issues in there, once you're aware of it, you can start to fix it, you can start to resolve it. I would argue by not going deeper, it is like if, for example, there was a fire going on in your office, you could ignore it. You could ignore it all day long because it might make you feel uncomfortable. It might make you feel hot. But if you ignore it for too long, it could burn the entire building down. And I feel that that's what's happened when we go for the safe surveys, where we only look at the rational element. We're missing out because we're uncomfortable with finding out what's really going on. So the brain and neuroscience helps us understand that. I also just want to say that I believe everyone on this webinar and myself, we're in the business of change. I haven't met a company in the last 2 to 3 to 4 years that isn't going through a lot of change. And I'd love to, please do put in the chat if your company is not going through any change at the moment. I'd love to know, and maybe I should go and work there as well, because maybe it's less stressful. But definitely a very, very high percentage of companies that we work with are going through massive changes. Some of them are structural, some of them are driven by technology, some of them are driven by immigration, some of them are driven by politics. But the CEO of Unilever coined the phrase permacrisis. We are moving into an era of permacrisis, which Sounds really scary, doesn't it? And it probably is scary. What to me that says is that if we know change is going to be more regular, we need to prepare our teams for change and ourselves. The one reason, we could do a whole presentation on this, but the one reason I'm sharing you with our neuroscience curves, so you may recognize this as similar to the Kubler-Ross change curve, is to show you that if you look at the labels at the bottom, instinctive, emotional, reflective, and rational, for someone to go through a change, they need to access all parts of their brain, and they need to process all of it, the instinctive parts, the emotional parts, the reflective parts, the rational parts. Most companies, when organizations are going through big change, they focus on the rational bit again. But if you think about it, let's just say your colleague's been made redundant. You're not going to be in a rational state. You're probably one of your first feelings will be instinct. You'll probably be fearful. Is that going to be me? And so on and so on. So what this is about is showing data from the different types of the brain and how we are, whether we're measuring engagement, whether we're measuring happiness, there is huge amounts of change, and that change and pace of change is only increasing. And we won't be able to help employees through that if we keep seeing them as rational beings and we keep ignoring, for example, emotional needs. If any of this, I'm going to slow down for a second, if any of this is raising questions, put them in. Hopefully we'll get loads of questions. Sometimes people are shy and they send me messages afterwards. That's absolutely fine. I identify myself as a shy person as well, which doesn't always get discussed in the world of work. So let's move on from change for a second. But why employee engagement and happiness? So when you boil down the differences and the way that we explain it is that employee engagement is what your brain needs at work. It's what psychology has helped us with really well over the last 20, 30, 40 years, understanding what the brain needs at work. What it's been quite bad at, and this is why we differentiate between the two, we define happiness as emotions and feelings, but we talk about it as what the heart needs at work. And so that's the easiest way to remember it from a start point, which is engagement is what your brain needs at work. Happiness is what your heart needs. The way that we think about it in the happiness index is if you've got engagement and it's doing and the scores are really high, but you don't have happiness, you won't have the energy to achieve what you want to achieve. A good example of that would be a car. Engagement would be the sat nav, the direction, the tools to get you there. Happiness would be the fuel. You could have all the stuff engaged, all the best technology, but if you don't have the fuel to get there, which we define as happiness, it's not going to be useful. So in summary, we define engagement as what the brain needs and happiness as what the heart needs. I will break down and the drivers of the separate ones in a second, but I just wanted to open by showing you how we think about it at the happiness index. So this slide often opens up some pathways for individuals who come to our sessions, even before they think about the happiness index for their company, because it is very possible to be happy at work, but not engaged. It's also possible to be engaged at work, but not happy. And when the two are grouped together, sometimes people don't realize that. And sometimes this slide here, this visual aid really helps people realize. So if you were to be happy at work, but not have engagement, you would have high levels of energy, strong relationships, but the team or the organization would be unfocused. What you see there is a lot of organizations running around in circles. We see that happen a lot in third sector, so charities, government organizations sometimes, where people have joined, they've got good relationships, got loads of energy, but there's not a directional plan. What we see a lot of, and more traditional, is we work with HR teams where they've been measuring engagement for quite a few years and the engagement scores are high. But the HR team know there's problems, they know there's issues, and their diagnostic tools are telling them that everything's all right. But they know that people are leaving, they know that people are unhappy, they know there's well-being issues. And we see this a lot where people come to us and say, our engagement scores are really high, but we know something's not right. That's often what we define as a competitive workplace where people are working in silos. They've got engagement right, but they don't have the happiness, they don't have those bonds between people, the relationships and the energy. Obviously, we don't want to be in the bottom left there, where we're not happy and we're not engaged. If your teams are going to be in that state, they're going to be a lot of people in survival. They're going to be in fight. They're going to be in flight. The third one that doesn't get talked about enough is freeze. Lots of us experience freeze when we're in that mode. So ultimately, if we're paying employees and they're in that survival mode, it is going to be one of the worst investments you're ever going to make. What we obviously want to do is get people into the growth state. Now, that's easier said than done. And people will drop, they will move from area to area, and it's impossible to get everyone in the top right. But what we'll do now is talk about what drives these areas and how we can move towards what we call a thriving culture. Keep the questions coming. I can't see, I don't know if there's any in there or none at all. But please keep popping them in and we'll get to them. Here's a bit of data from 2021. You might remember 2021, or you might have blocked it out like I have out of my head, which is the pandemic. So I want to share this data with you. The black line is the average of engagement and happiness across the globe. So this is from over 100 countries. The pink line is engagement. So that's engagement across the globe from our data set. Happiness is the yellow line. What this shows, and this is what we see a lot from companies, and I'll just pick a few things here out to show you. So first off, the general trend of down up follows each other. What that indicates is that there's a relationship between the two. So what that can indicate and show is that if your engagement is impacted, so can your happiness. So although we showed them in the boxes earlier as separate, they do have a relationship between them. The other thing of that they're seeing the similar trend, like the curve that you can see on here, is they are different. So yes, they have a relationship, but they are different scores. And what you can see in this graph is that happiness is well below engagement. What this showed in the pandemic is engagement was actually not that far off average in the pandemic, which was a horrific situation for many of us. But happiness was well below the average. What happened 12 months after this graph was the Great Resignation. So what this graph is a reminder to us is, one, happiness and engagement are different, but we should never forget they are related. And we should also understand that happiness, and we'll get on to the difference between a target and a metric, is a really useful metric for predicting the future. What happiness predicted here is high levels of resignation. The happiness index in our webinars, and you can go back and look at it, this isn't showing off. We were warning about the Great Resignation 6 months before the Great Resignation. And it's not because we were smart in any shape or form. It's because we were looking at the data. So once companies start measuring happiness and engagement in our platform, it shows them gives them a deeper level of awareness, but starts to show them what's really happening in their organization, which, as I said before, can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable to see low scores. But it's better to see low scores and work on it than not see them and think of low scores again as that like fire that's happening in the corner. It's better to have a low score than no score. So, Matt, you've just showed me low happiness. If we wanted to improve happiness, how would we do that? So when you look across our research and our data sets and external research as well, this is what we consistently see as the top 4 drivers of happiness. So the number one consistently in the countries that we work with shows that the number one driver of happiness is positive relationships. Closely behind that is feelings of acknowledgement, freedom to take opportunities, and psychological safety. The thing that I want to remind you is when you go down this list, everything that makes us happy wasn't invented in the last 1,000 years. Those things are the same. They drove your grandparents, your great grandparents, your great great grandparents, your great 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 grandparents, your great 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 grandparents. These are universal needs that we all feel. Some of them, others will rank them more higher than others. I personally, freedom to take opportunities is probably the number one for me. It probably links to me being an entrepreneur. I'd ask everyone now in the chat to just type in which is the number one of those 4 for them. And this activity that you're doing now is a really good activity, I would say, to do with your team. If you can, screenshot this slide. I'd screenshot this slide at your next team meeting. Just ask your team to share which is the top driver for them, and you'll be surprised with the diversity. And you'll also be surprised with what people say. Sometimes you think you might know someone. You often find people have had a bad experience somewhere else before they work with you will say psychological safety, because they may have been bullied somewhere, they may have had an issue. Just like in all relationships, we can take bad situations and move them into the future. So sometimes you might have to work harder on trust with someone that's been in potentially a toxic culture before. You may recognize that in yourself. Although positive relationships is the number one driver, I would argue, and I'm happy to sort of die on this hill, is I would always still recommend psychological safety is always the place to start when you're looking to drive happiness or build any thriving culture, because unless people feel safe, remember back to the brain slide, they're going to be in the instinctive fight, flight, freeze part of their brain. They're not going to be able to access that front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, where things like creativity sit. So I would say always start with a program that makes new employees, current employees feel safe, and then build out from there. It's really going to be really hard to build positive relationships if people don't feel safe. So we talked about low scores in happiness. If you're looking to improve, these are the top 4. These are the places to start. But I would always start with psychological safety as a guiding principle. So we talked about positive relationships being the number one driver of happiness. So let's delve into that a little bit. Happiness is made up of our instinctive needs and emotional needs. Engagement, well, I won't read all these out because the slides will be available. Engagement is made up of our reflective and rational needs. Remember, thinking back to the brain. Positive relationships sit within the emotional part of the brain. So I will just read this one part out. I know you can all read, but I will just give you a chance to listen and reflect on the words. Our immediate response to other people and our environment in the world of work is often related to relationships, both with each other and how you feel about yourself. I think that last bit there about how you feel about yourself, how someone makes you feel. You've probably all heard that statement. You won't necessarily remember what someone said, but you will remember how they made you feel. For a long, long time, the business world has only looked at that rational bit, our ability to think at a slower speed and consider our options. Our rational brain seeks order and clarity and is comfortable with constructs like structure, processes, and systems. I am not advocating for a world of chaos. Rational is still really important, but it's all about balancing the two. If we want to get into that top right, thriving culture, we need to be addressing the instinctive, emotional, reflective, and rational needs. Another activity that I'd ask people to do now, just type into the chat what you feel personally is the most important to you out of following your instincts, following your emotions, time to sit back and be reflective, time to be rational. Again, in this group of people on here, you'll see huge diversity. So just remember, just because one is important to you, it doesn't mean it's not going to be necessarily important for one of your team members. The example that we use with the team that I sit, we've got someone that is very reflective, and we've got someone that's very instinctive. The way that I manage both of those people needs and should be different because they have different needs. If I managed one way, they'd think I was a micromanager. If I managed that same person the same way, they'd think I was too distant and didn't care. Understanding your team is critical to understanding what we're talking about here. Again, if questions are coming up, pop them in the chat. So I'll just take you from the top down here, in here, because it's going to bring, this diagram brings together all the previous slides. So we're obviously shooting for a thriving culture at the top there, but to get that, we need happiness and engagement. Engagement is everything on the right-hand side of this triangle. Happiness is everything on the left. Traditionally, companies have looked at that rational bit. Look at the words down there under rational: clarity, enablement. So all the stuff we still need, they're still really important. Reflective starts to bring in some of the newer areas like personal growth, meaning and purpose. Companies have started to get onto that in the last 5 to 10 years. Values. But when we're talking about relations, we're talking about the emotional needs again. So what fits within relationships? So we've got personal relationships, energetic connections, and team dynamics. Energetic connections is probably the one that people are most least familiar with. It's that feeling that you're in a team that can achieve together, where you trust each other. And then obviously all the way over on the left, these are the things that we're not necessarily always aware of. Are we safe? Do we have freedom? And so on. So take this diagram if you wish. Our platform measures all these areas, but you can use that without being a customer of the happiness index. We're advocating for a world where people listen to their employees and look after their needs. So please take this slide and use it in your team meetings and spark some conversations. So I just wanted to bring out these descriptions around the difference between energetic connections, team dynamics, and personal relationships. Again, I'm not going to read all of them, but I will just read one to give you a bit of space for your brain to move into reflective as well. Being able to connect with a team provides a vital social ingredient to our emotional needs and gives us opportunity to feel that we belong. If you look externally, and if you look at a lot of the research that's done by Oxford University into the broad subject of happiness, and I'm going outside of the world of work of happiness, everything we've been talking about in this presentation is about workplace happiness. If you look at the research coming out of Oxford University by Jean Deneve, belonging comes out the number one driver. That is something that is universal. It is something around the world that we want to feel to belong. And that's what a lot of employees are looking for. Lots of people come to our webinars now and they say things like Gen Z are hard to manage is a statement that we hear. Often it's because different generations have different expectations around what's important. We're seeing more of a need to understand and to fulfill these needs. And I think with all of it, you have a choice. You have a choice to fulfill it or not to fulfill it. But the outcomes will impact your organizations positively or negatively. So I'm not here to preach at anyone. We're just explaining what we see is going on through the data. So we're going into the last 5 minutes now. So one thing I want to share with you is we haven't gone through the business case for happiness. That's a separate session. I've written a book called The Business Case for Happiness. It's called Freedom to Be Happy. You can have a read of that if you wish. But what you see is that happiness drives performance of organizations. It drives loads of other stuff like creativity and accuracy of task as well. But what we realize is if employees don't share emotions, it's really hard to build relationships. If you don't build relationships, it's hard to have a happy workforce. If you don't have a happy workforce, it's hard to drive performance beyond your peers. What that tells us is if you're not sharing emotions at work or you don't feel safe to, you're actually hitting performance. So emotions are actually a performance issue, but they often get blocked out as not professional or all these things that are fluffy. But try and think of emotions as data points. It's your body, it's your team, it's telling you about something that's going on in your environment. And once you've got that data, you can start to fix it. So I just wanted to just touch on emotions and just make that link with performance. So we're just going into the last 5 minutes now. So you come along to this webinar by this guy called Matt, and he's saying, look, emotions are important for performance. And you're thinking, right, I'm just going to go back into the office now and I'm going to share all my emotions. So can we freely do that? The answer in many organizations is no, no, and no, sadly. And I'm going to sip my tea while you reflect on that point. The reason being why lots of people can't actually share how they feel is what we call the toxic positivity police. And we make this point because we don't want the happiness index to fall into that bracket of toxic positivity. A good example would be toxic positivity is where you've got an issue with customer service, but management don't want to hear about it. They only want to hear the good stuff. Toxic positivity is where leadership teams only want to hear the good stuff, and they accuse people who are bringing real problems as being negative or mood hoovers and all these kinds of words. A culture of toxic positivity is really dangerous to an organization because if you don't know about the bad stuff, you can't fix it. So sadly, in environments that are not psychologically safe, sometimes the messengers are the people that get in trouble, and sometimes they're deemed troublemakers. So I would encourage you to build psychologically safe environments where people can share their emotions. But I always caveat that with some people can end up getting in trouble. And the way that we describe this, think about this from an astronaut going to Mars. If you try and take your mask off straight away before the oxygen is in the environment, you could end up in a bad, very, 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 very bad situation. So what we say is build the environment and culture first, and the rest of that will come. Another little thing that we advocate for is not to make happiness a target. This isn't us saying happiness isn't important. What we're talking about is the difference between a metric and a target. There's someone way smarter than me that always said once a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a useful metric. The way that we think of happiness, and think of it up the top right there, think of it like a heartbeat. It's supposed to go up and down, and you can learn as much from the downs as the ups. So if you were to go around the office and tell your employees to be happy, or if the next time one of your friends says, oh, I'm going through a divorce, I'm unhappy, and you tell them to cheer up, I tell what's going to happen. They're not going to cheer up. So what we're trying to make sure people understand is happiness is important. Increased levels of happiness are great for things like performance, but it's the study of happiness and measuring happiness that helps you improve it over time. I know that's a small distinction, but it's an incredibly important one, we believe. So metrics, not targets. Here's a good example of it. This is actually real life data turned into a graph. But if you look at that first part of the yellow graph where it peaks at like 5.2, if there was a culture of toxic positivity, the minute it went down, and if everyone ignored it and pretended it wasn't going down, it would peak. It would never go up again, because the reason it wouldn't go up is because you wouldn't fix the problems that are occurring. So by fixing the problems when it goes down to like 4.8, it allows it to go up to 8 afterwards, and so on. The next trough. Don't see troughs as bad. See them as opportunities to learn so you can improve over time. We encourage all our clients to think like a gardener, think like a farmer, think of all of these things that we talked about, like safety, freedom, acknowledgement, relationships. Think of them as ingredients. All you can do is nurture. All you can do is nurture those ingredients. We always say you can't make your team happy. You can't make your wife happy. You can't make your husband happy. You can't make your children happy. All you can do is provide the ingredients in the environment. No one person can make another person happy. It isn't possible. And it doesn't mean you can't try, but the way to try is to make the ingredients available in the environment: safety, freedom, acknowledgement, relationships. There's thousands of factors beyond that, but start with the top 4. So that's just a little bit about what we mean by making it a metric, not a target, and the work that needs to be done. So we're going into the last slide now. Connectivity isn't just for the internet. My closing statement at most keynotes and so on is always the same. The research that we are uncovering at the Happiness Index is about employees, but I would bet my career on the fact that the stuff that we're uncovering at work from these employees that we like to be known as human beings actually applies in your personal life as well. So all these wider factors here: safety, freedom, acknowledgement, relationships, meaning and purpose, personal growth, clarity, enablement. My closing statement to you would be, these are not just important at work, they are also important in your private life. They're important in your families, they're important in your friendships. So I would say, I hope you took 1 or 2 things away today that you can bring back to your teams. But if 1 or 2 of you start to apply some of this stuff in your personal life as well, that would make me happy. So thank you. And I'll just hand back to Kashi. I don't know if we've got enough time for questions, if there's any common things that came out.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that we've got some time for.
I'll come out of this presentation then.
Wicked. Thanks, Matt. That was wicked. One question we've got here is, someone said, Matt, what was this quote? Once you make something a target, it ceases to be
a useful metric. The guy that said it, let me Google it now, has got such a brilliant name. I bet someone can Google it quicker than me. Once you make a target, once you make a metric a target, it ceases to be useful. Yeah, good heart. Thank you, Loretto. It's just a really important, heartbeat's a good example again to use. you measure heartbeat not because it's a target. You measure it to understand the health of you as a human being, and that's why once if you make the mistake, sometimes people make things a target, and then you end up with all this weird behavior, like going around the office telling everyone to be happy. The example that I always use is, when you see two people having an argument and someone tells someone to calm down, never in the history of someone telling one person to calm down has anyone ever calmed down. And that's what you're trying to avoid, this like weird behavior where you're making useful things targets.
Definitely. And then we have one anonymous question here. Sort of like feels like I'm going to put it to you like you're in agony, real quick.
That's my
But
job. I just want to
yeah,
put that there.
absolutely. But we have someone here that says they have employees that are bored and unhappy with the work that they do. However, they're an agency and they have to work with the requirements of their clients, and sometimes they struggle to support these employees. Would you have
That
any
is
advice?
Well, I've been in that world. I've been in that world of running a marketing agency where that is the case. I think there's obviously I'll always say more data required. Like let's get into that. But what that person is facing is a real challenge where your culture doesn't sit in a silo. So the culture of those clients are going to impact how someone feels in their team. So uh, there's tactical things that you can do, like trying to match the employees to the values of the clients you've got. That will go so far, but I would say we would want to dig into that and understand the culture within the organization. Like, to give you an example, the best thing we ever did when we had that marketing agency was fire a client that didn't match our values, which sounds like a terrible financial move, which in the short term it wasn't great, but the amount of energy drain that company was putting on my company meant that once we fired that client, the amount of like energetic connections and everything that fired out was incredible. So I'd need to know more on that situation, but all I would say is not uncommon, but definitely dig a bit deeper into it, I would say.
Wicked. Okay, sweet. Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, please do feel free to like email them over or anything, or message Matt on LinkedIn. And we'll get them answered for you as best as we can. But that is about it for today. Thank
Yeah.
you all so much.
Thanks everyone for coming. If you do use any of those slides with your team, or you do any of those activities, let us know. Send me a message on LinkedIn or whatever. We love to hear how stuff is used.
Yeah, send us a selfie from your meeting room. We'd love to see
Yes.
that.
Selfies from meeting rooms, please.
Absolutely. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining, and thanks, Matt. This was really interesting.
Thanks
Um,
everyone.
yeah.